If you had a magic wand, what would you do to get a quick win to manage diffuse water pollution better? What can you do to manage water better? And as you've got the microphone, David, I'll start with you.
That better? That better? Yeah. What would I do? Well, I think, as I said, it's about looking at what we do already, building on what we do already. We're all constrained for resources, and certainly that was one of the challenges we said in Staffordshire, was that we do this differently. Can we, using existing resource, or preferably reduced resource, can we empty our system more often? Can we clean our system more often? And hopefully demonstrated that if we do that, that will already give them some benefits, not just in terms of pollution, but also the flood risk management aspects that we're all seeking to achieve as well.
I would go back to the point I made earlier on today, that we need to prioritise the outfalls. So look at the water bodies that are at most risk, look at the outfalls that produce the most pollution, target them first, and then once you deal with them, then cascade from there.
And if I had a magic wand, I'd create a machine that did that and put big red spots on the ground so that we could identify those locations.
I think better sharing of asset data and information would go a long way. I mean, speaking to counterparts in TfL, they are completing a large-scale mapping exercise of things like where their assets are. It doesn't go as far as where they connect to, so they do know where their gullies are now, just not what they drain into. Similarly, we don't always know where our assets are, or what's discharging into them, or where they end up. So I think better mapping, better asset data capture, and better modelling will probably show up a lot of opportunities and foster better understanding of the sources of problems.
I'd like to hit Defra over the head with it and say, come on, let's get this out here. I think I'll make the biggest difference. Bank cars? I don't know, modal shift. It's about the best one.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Can I just ask all the engineers to comment on the problems that we have with persuading highways engineers to actually dig up the road construction and plant trees, and for them to not freak that it's going to just completely destroy the road infrastructure?
Who wants to deal with that first?
I think that depends on the road construction, the geology, and how forward-thinking the highways engineers are. I don't have a problem if you want to, putting trees in roads, but you've got to have the right root protection, etc., and maintenance of them. But you can see why. I mean, we don't like building new roads, and the utility comes along and just cuts the hole straight through the middle of it. It ruins it. But I don't see, in older roads, I don't see a problem.
Yeah, but I think if you'd asked me that question, several years ago, I would have freaked out and said no way, because I am a maintenance engineer, and there's been a real shift, or certainly in certain authorities there's been a real shift, very much based upon why do we have this infrastructure in the first place, it's about having an infrastructure for people to use, it's about infrastructure for communities. And therefore, it's still a challenge for highway maintenance engineers, because the first thing we think of is, well, who's going to look after it? How's it going to perform? What's it going to do to the network, etc. So those thoughts do go through our mind, but they are more tempered now, I think, than ever, because there's a real realisation that roads are for people, roads are for communities, and if we can work with those local communities in a different way, and that's what those local communities want, then that's helping us to change our way of thinking.
Any more questions?
If we need to speak to all the, I need to speak to the drainage engineers across all local authorities across the whole of England, is there a place where you all gather? Is there a drainage engineers are us or something? It's really, really hard to, you know, I'm faced with having to speak to hundreds and hundreds of local authorities individually, and I don't know how to reach them all at once.
I suppose apart from the obvious, organisation like Landform potentially bring them together. Probably your best bet at the moment, apart from the hope for the bewildered, which is probably where we'll all end up at some point, is you've got perhaps some of the regional organisations, or perhaps some of the organisations such as Highway Maintenance and Efficiency Programme, that you could come in at that sort of level and use that as a platform to. You're not necessarily going to get to speak to, you know, every highway maintenance engineer in the country. That would be quite a challenge. But I think certainly if you look at organisations like that, that probably represent some of the best in class, then you'll stand more chance of getting into the right organisations.
It's a good point though, because you've not only got the local authority, you've got the consultancy side of things as well. We've got a lot of engineers designing road features need to get retouched, need to be involved. I meet a lot of them who are old style engineers, and when you start talking suds, you see them glazing over because they don't understand it, they haven't been taught it, and they're slow to respond to that. So I don't know how you get everybody on board, and that's a very difficult one.
CIRIA and Landform only just started having conversations with the Chartered Institute of Highway and Transportation. We know that we have to do an awful lot more with them and organisations like them to look at what do we do with regards to using roads for conveyance and sacrificial storage, what can you do with regards to green infrastructure and looking at diffuse pollution. So I think there's a growing recognition that we need to break out our silos. So that's something at least.
Just to follow that point, I think one of the things that does seem to be valued is institutional civil engineers, like organisation office. They have regional events and you get guest talkers, speakers come along, and they're normally the forum. You might not get everybody turn along at them, but people will turn back to talk about it.
Just maybe one slight follow-up on that is we recently conducted a roads review looking at how we can work together across local authority and Transport Scotland. And there was a meeting similar to this, and someone mentioned that very topic, and he said there's a whole bunch of influencers in the room, and you have a lot of information you should go out and talk to people. But one of the questions that came back from the floor is, yes, we are the influencers, but who are the decision makers? And maybe that's the thing to think about in terms of spreading information. It's all very well thinking you wish to influence, but who actually makes the decisions in terms of changing the ways of doing things?
That's a good question. If I was nasty, I'd put that back to the panel. Who are the influence changers in your line of business?
I think probably academic institutions who train young engineers who are coming forward in 4 years' time, directors and heads of local authorities and organisations such as Transport Scotland, people that can make decisions that inside 5 minutes can say that's the way we're going to do things in the future.
I was just going to build on what Joe said, in that what's come out this afternoon is very much sharing of information across different departments and different organisations, and it really is fundamental that we are talking together. It is a shared problem, and that really has come out. And so if we can get across to the decision makers and the influencers, and we can share this information, that is the only way forward, I think.
Hi, Simon Jones, Metis Consultants. In a time when local authorities are really cutting back expenditure, and in some cases right back to statutory obligations, what sort of evidence can you put forward to help build a business case to spend money on things like reducing diffuse pollution? Obviously there's drivers to reduce flooding, and that can be integrated into those projects, but if you're looking at specifically trying to reduce pollution, particularly in times when sometimes you hear stories about the Thames being the cleanest it's ever been, salmon returning to the Thames, that sort of thing. Where's the evidence to really drive home the business case to get the funding to do some of these things?
Well, I've got the microphone, so I can make a quick observation before I hand it to somebody else to make another contribution. That one of the things we, just as an observation rather than directly answer the question, I was talking earlier that we carried out a review recently that showed that for every pound we save, we'd lose £1.40. And okay, we're living in times of austerity, but that proved to us that we can cut budgets, but actually you're going to lose more money by cutting money, but if you don't have that money in the first instance. But I think a direct cost-benefit analysis of the costs and the benefits of any particular new process has been taken forward, but also the key thing for us is extending the asset life. And I mean, I suppose the other thing is an observation in terms of a challenge. It's all very well in terms of if we're working together. If we can demonstrate the benefits for us as an organisation, that's good, but maybe some benefits from other organisations. So how, in terms of partnering and collaboration, do we encourage a contribution in terms of the win that they can receive? And it was mentioned earlier that maybe, okay, polluter pays, but maybe the benefactor should contribute as well. And if you're working in a collaborative way, if one organisation is making a little benefit and another one's making more, but that one's putting most in, then maybe there should be a bit more sharing somehow.
Can I ask you to pass the microphone to Owen, because I know he's been dealing with these types of issues.
I really am the wrong person to ask about funding. If you take the highway sub scheme I'm looking at, that is purely spin. It's about traffic calming, it's about space and place. If I turned around to senior manager and said, you know what, I'm going to put rain gardens in to attenuate flooding. So I just spin it at the moment, and then I need to prove that yes, it works. I need to show them physically that this does work, and that's why I work. So I am the wrong person to ask, but I just beg borrow still, basically.
You do it effectively, though.
I think from those who went to the DEFRA training in June, and they come out with the Water Framework Directive, or you've got to be compliant by Christmas, but we can't tell you what you be compliant with. You've got to learn from your local VA. I mean, presumably that's going to come on water quality. They're going to come up and say you've got to do this, that, and the other to comply. And as lead flood authority, we have to comply. So presumably that's going to be a good get on to go to our strategic directors to say, well, you've got to do this now as lead flood authority when they tell us.
I mean, I can't help thinking, listening to it, trying to compare it to past sort of step changes in environmental improvements, such as the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which arguably you could say is the reason that the Thames is the cleanest it's been since its history of being not very clean. It was legislation, it was even, you could say, externally imposed legislation from the European Union. I don't suppose there was much discussion or debate about the cost benefits. It just happened. It was incorporated. I'm sure there was impact assessment, but it was just incorporated into UK law. It was undoubtedly a catalyst, I think, for the privatisation of the water industry, which shifted that huge tranche of investment from the public sector borrowing environment to the private sector and to the customers. If you look at it in the past, large step improvements in either public health, flood risk, environmental quality, most of them have been prompted either by a disaster or by legislation coming in. In this case, I mean, a lot of these things, it tends to follow the money. If something's costing someone something, they'll do something about it. The challenge here, particularly with diffuse circle pollution, I think, is pinning the cost on the right people, and with pinning it on the beneficiaries, it's actually costing that benefit. We all speak, people will point to clear-cut economic benefits of car ownership or of good transport, means of transport, but when they talk about, I know we talk about ecosystem services, when they talk about clean rivers and better places to live, putting a price on that and putting meeting that price with the right people we're not there yet. At the moment, people enjoy benefits they don't pay for, people incur costs they're not compensating for. Until I think you align that better, or you enable people to share costs and benefits better, I think any improvements will be incremental, and they'll be, as a result of, say, just ad hoc collaboration and people being innovative. I think if you want to see that sort of step improvement that we've seen in the past, you'll need legislation, and you will need a change to the cost-benefit ownership.
Yeah, on the back of the guidance that CIRIA put together on retrofitting, we recognise the whole thing about cost-benefit appraisal is going to be key in terms of taking things forward. And we're working with the Environment Agency to look at a project to demonstrate the benefits and costs for sustainable drainage. So hopefully we'll start looking at the areas of diffuse pollution, flood risk, urban heat on effect, and all the other elements that link to ecosystem services to try and map out what those benefits and costs are, as a vehicle to get people around the table to work out how those costs and benefits are apportioned. Any more questions?
Oh, Ian Page from Jacobs. Earlier in the day, Steve Wilson talked about a couple of permanent paving sites which haven't been shown any maintenance over 10 years. Gordon talked about permanent paving probably needs road sweeping twice a year or something like that. So they're quite two contrasting levels of maintenance. So in terms of developing commuted sums and whole life costings, I'd be quite interested to know what the Scottish input was in terms of their whole life costing spreadsheet.
That's an assessment that would be in the tool, but the technical detail, I've not actually looked at that in too much detail, but I'd welcome your thoughts on that when you perhaps if you start using the actual tool and methodology.
Can I ask you, do you specify maintenance?
Yeah, we're starting to look at commuted sums for paying for some of these things.
What maintenance regime do you include when you're starting to put together commuted sums? Can you use the microphone, please?
Different maintenance regimes for different systems, but a lot of the systems, urban pavement systems, I agree, are highly serviceable with next to no maintenance. Whether that's going to affect their longer term performance or not, I don't know. So it'd be interested to know, more maintenance, less longer term costs in terms of or vice versa.
Yeah, just in terms of the tool, there's paradigms in there and methods of analysis within the tool, but I think we'd welcome feedback on users of the tool. One of the things that we'll take on board is Jed's findings in terms of how filter drains perform and what some of the real issues are. And the idea is to develop the tool and improve it as we go forward. So I think rather than specifically answer the questions, I'll respond by saying we'd welcome feedback from users of the tool so that we can develop it further.
Sorry, just to follow up. So one of the things I found with my research is it's very difficult to determine a sediment model because local factors influence sediment build-up, sediment movement greatly, especially when I looked at filter drains. I could walk along a 100-metre stretch of filter drain and get a totally different sediment output from the filter drain. But beyond structural things, usually if you have a concrete safety barrier, for example, in the middle of the carriageway, you'll find that you have a really high sediment build-up on the filter drain on the side because the sediment can't transfer itself across the carriageway, bounces off the safety barrier and heads back to the filter drain. So some things like that, and how you build that into this type of tool is difficult.
Do you want to have the last thing?
Just very quickly, Gordon, before you answer this, a question related to this via Twitter that we had earlier, which you might be able to answer at the same time, was just with regards to permeable pavements. And is there a reason why permeable pavements only really talked about in a car park situation and not actually in a general road situation?
I don't know, we use them in all the state roads, when all the new estate roads are built. We push porous pavement. The guidance for maintenance, when they first came out, was twice yearly suction sweeping. And that's why we worked out the community sum that way. I know as well as Steve knows, porous pavement road will work 90% blocked. So still to 90% it'll still work. And I know Coventry have had porous pavement in under trees for 10, 15 years now and not cleaned it, it still works. So when you're setting up your exams, you've got to go manufacturer's recommendations. Even though I know you can do it a lot less. And we would use, porous pavement, we use car parks, roads, not on main roads, not on bus routes, we've got to be turning, but all the state roads, ideal.
Okay, great. There's the microphone.